Crime nerds, who is the worst serial killer nobody has heard of? Alexei Suklitin, a literal real-life vampire. His violent tendencies first manifested during his childhood. At the age of 6 he was caught unaliving cats and dogs in disturbing ways. As a teenager he attempted to rope a woman but was interrupted by 2 men who apprehended him and took him to the nearest police station along with the girl. Due to his young age and unarguable remorse shown at the trial, he was only given a 2-year sentence. Suklitin got bullied by fellow inmates who nicknamed him the alligator for his prominent jaw and surly demeanor. After he was set free he soon committed another crime. He convinced 2 acquaintances of his to rob an elderly woman's apartment. They pretended to be maintenance workers and after being let inside, they incapacitated her and robbed the place. The woman soon woke up and contacted the police, providing them with enough details of her attackers to get them arrested that same day. As Suklitin was a repeat offender, he got a lengthy 12-year sentence. Suklitin became an informant for the prison authorities, telling on inmates who broke the rules. He was considered part of the lowest of the low by his fellow prisoners, who held him in contempt, laid hands, and even roped him. He failed to secure an early release and left prison exactly 12 years later. He managed to get married but was not made for family life, cheating on his wife, laying hands, and eventually leaving her after finding out she was pregnant. He moved to a nearby village and got hired as a guard. It was there that Suklitin met his future accomplice. Suklitin was unhappy with the meager wage he was earning as a guard, so he talked Dina and a friend of his called Rinat Volkov into pulling a blackmail scheme. The woman would travel from the village to the city and take a taxi back late in the evening. During the drive, she would complain to the taxi driver about her unhappy marriage and eventually invite him to the house for intimacy. If the driver agreed, they would go to bed only to be suddenly discovered by Suklitin and Volkov playing the roles of Dina's husband and brother respectively. They would pretend to be taking photos of the lovers in bed and blackmail the driver into paying them or the photos were made public. The scheme was successful but Suklitin eventually got bored of extorting money from taxi drivers and decided to escalate his crimes. One day, Suklitin told Dina that he wanted to unalive her friend Ludmila. After Ludmila came over and Suklitin had intimacy with her, he gestured to Dina that he was about to do it, at which point the terrified woman asked Ludmila to leave. That infuriated Suklitin, who proceeded to severely lay hands on Dina, after which she became even more subservient to him. A bit later Suklitin met a woman called Ekaterina Osetrova at the Kazan train station and invited her back to his house in the village. Dina Shakirova was waiting for them inside, and when the pair emerged from the bedroom having had intimacy, she distracted Ekaterina, while Suklitin incapacitated the woman. He then placed her into a tub and started drinking the red, ordering Dina to do the same. After the woman eventually passed, Suklitin and Dina suspended the finished product. They divided the product up for their dinner later. They made soup and dumplings, eating some themselves and feeding the rest to their dog. This was only the beginning of his plans. Crime nerds, who is the worst serial killer nobody has heard of? After Suklitin and Dina's first major crime, they bumped into 2 young women on the street and invited them home to celebrate New Year's. The women, Tatiana and Elena, got intoxicated and went to bed. The next morning, Tatiana was nowhere to be found. Elena was told that her friend had left for Kazan at the crack of dawn and was then quickly escorted out of the house. In reality, Tatiana had been unalived in her sleep. They then would go to divide up their product again. Elena was left alive because Suklitin thought she was too skinny for his tastes. After the pair got rid of Elena, Dina went to a local store and bought a tape recorder using Tatiana's passport, while Suklitin prepared the product and sold it to the neighbors under the guise of pork. Just a month later, Rizita Galimova came over to Suklitin's house. The girl had just enrolled into a university in Kazan and was looking for a place to stay, so Suklitin promised to help. Rizita was roped and never left the house. The girl looked for Dina's help, but she ignored her and even wore her blouse after she passed. Another month passed and Nadezhda Sidiovina came to the house. Suklitin had taken a liking to her and even considered dumping Dina for her. Soon afterwards, however, Nadezhda was unalived in a fit of anger. He kept some of her product in the fridge and sold the rest to the neighbors, while Dina got a new blouse to wear. One day, Nadezhda's friend came from Kazan inquiring about the missing woman and noticed Dina wearing Nadezhda's clothes. Suklitin figured she knew too much, so he got rid of the problem. By spring, Suklitin had unalived 5 women, but his appetite was far from satisfied. Update 2, Crime nerds, who is the worst serial killer nobody has heard of? Suklitin's relationship with Dina Shakirova was becoming increasingly strained. Next, Suklitin was visiting Kazan when he spotted Valentina Elikova buying some ice cream. Introducing himself as the girl's uncle, he invited her back to his house and was so convincing that Valentina eventually agreed to go with him. It was too much for Dina and she tried to lay hands on Suklitin but ended up worse off than him. Suklitin decided to keep the girl for a while, so one day when he was out, Dina tried to put her on a train somewhere far away. Unfortunately, Suklitin intercepted them on the way to the station. They went back to the house and he laid hands on Diana, while taking Valentina's life, turning her into product. The breaking point for Dina came shortly after, when Suklitin ordered her to find a baby, which in her mind put her own baby daughter at risk. She gathered up her courage and left to live with her parents. Suklitin wasn't worried about her going to the police and instead found a new girlfriend, Lydia Fyodorova. Suklitin was aware of the fact that he needed a new accomplice, so at some point he confided in Lydia in his activities, presenting his activities as public service. Lydia not only refused to help but eventually started to blackmail him, threatening to alert the police unless he provided her money to fuel her substance problems. Deciding that Lydia had become a problem, Suklitin conspired with her own relative Nikitin to remove the issue. The trio were drinking at Suklitin's when suddenly the 2 men turned on Lydia. They disposed of the problem and after getting the product they had some for dinner. Suklitin then contacted Dina, and despite their past, the woman still decided to come back to the village, where she helped clean up the loose ends of the problem. Soon after, Lydia's family went to the police, saying she had gone missing. Having established that the woman had recently moved in with Suklitin, the police paid him a visit and even briefly searched the house but didn't find anything suspicious and were satisfied with the explanation that Lydia had left in an unknown direction after a spat. However, Suklitin's days as a free man were numbered. Update 3, Crime Nerds, who is the worst serial killer nobody has heard of. After his latest problem with Lydia, Suklitin went drinking with a friend called Gennady Uglov. Uglov asked him about Lydia's disappearance. The intoxicated Suklitin then blurted out that he had unalived and made product with 7 people using the product for dinner, which Uglov didn't take seriously. Suklitin then suggested that they unalive Dina together and have her products together over drinks, but Uglov waved it off as a joke as well. To prove just how serious he was, Suklitin took Uglov outside and showed him Lydia Fyodorova's products. The horrified Uglov stayed silent for the moment, but while the two continued their binge in Kazan, he took an opportunity to lose Suklitin in a crowd and rushed to the police. However, the law enforcement considered his story little more than intoxicated ramblings and didn't follow up on it. The next day, Suklitin, who had become suspicious, invited Uglov over and tried to unalive him. The injured Uglov managed to escape and made his way to the hospital, where the concerned doctors called the police. When officers arrived at Suklitin's property this time, they instantly smelt a nauseating stench and quickly discovered the products. Inside the house they found the passports and personal belongings from all the women. Despite no traces of red, a nail was discovered upon which Suklitin would prepare his product. It took 3 days and a whole company of soldiers to unearth everything. Suklitin was immediately arrested, followed by Dina Shakirova a few hours later. After news had spread about Suklitin, the locals burned his house to the ground and turned the place into a dump site. During the interrogation, Suklitin confessed to Lydia Fyodorova but initially denied any other wrongdoing until he was told that everything had been found in his garden, at which point he admitted guilt to all the other women as well. However, he never showed any hint of remorse, proudly insisting that he was cleansing society of amoral elements. He even gifted one of the detectives an autographed photo of himself with the inscription "To remember your first meeting with a vampire." His explanations were just as bone-chilling as the crimes themselves. Update 4, Crime Nerds, who is the worst serial killer nobody has heard of. During his time in jail, he bragged about his crime to other inmates in an attempt to impress them, but they laid hands on him the same way they did during his very first stint in prison. As for Dina, who was kept at a local monastery for her own safety, she only admitted to her part of the crime at first, but after being threatened with capital punishment she started to talk for fear of making her daughter an orphan.
I never unalived anyone myself, though I admit that I was Suklitin's accomplice. I prepared warm water and after, I helped prepare the product. I cleaned the house after to conceal traces of red. I admit my responsibility for these activities don't diminish it, but it was Suklitin who roped me into it. I was afraid. Better to be on his side than become product.
The police also arrested Anatoly Nikitin, who helped the Suklitin during his last venture, as well as Renat Volkov, who took part in some of the schemes. Suklitin, Dina, and Nikitin were transferred to Moscow, where they underwent psychiatric evaluation and were all deemed fit to stand trial. Dina was diagnosed with substance problems and psychopathy-like personality changes, whereas Suklitin was noted to possess psychopathic personality traits, such as egocentrism, heightened excitability, cruelty, and vindictiveness. He was asked,
"Why did you unalive for the first time and how did you come to use the product for dinner?"
"I was curious. I love women and being in bed with them. I wanted to see what their product tasted like."
"Are you not afraid of God, Suklitin? On Judgment Day?"
"Why do I care for God? I'm my own God and devil. To be honest, I am afraid of death, but I don't feel like dying right now and I haven't lived long enough. Never mind your Judgment Day." The trial lasted for a month, with Suklitin behaving in a calm manner and even being allowed to smoke in the courtroom so as to coax a confession out of him. He relished the details of his activities, refusing to believe that he could be sentenced to death for removing swine. Unsurprisingly, however, he was sentenced to death. His last wish was to have a meeting with Dina, during which he asked for her forgiveness and gave her an apple. What she did with the apple is sadly unknown.